The elevator smelled of melted plastic and dust, even though the fan was silent and the light was barely flickering, as if someone had turned on the recording in the dark. A flat key, cold as a coin made of snow, lay on the mat by the door. He turned it over and placed it on the mailbox, deciding to take it to the concierge in the morning. The camera under the ceiling in the hallway flashed briefly as he inserted the key into the lock, and the flash sounded like an empty cough in the house. He began with the usual remark for the channel. He greeted the viewers, asked them to write in the comments where they were listening from, said that today there would be a story about an apartment that changed every day by the thickness of a palm, and wished them peaceful listening without unnecessary fears. He added that he would tell the story without loud words, only through objects and recurring details. His life was simple and frugal. He worked remotely in customer support and had a side job in the evenings because he was afraid of missing his rent payment. The lease was ending in the fall, and he had nowhere else to go. His mother lived in the suburbs and often assured him that she could manage on her own, but he still sent her money little by little as best he could. This saved him time and energy for everything else, and he was strict about keeping things tidy. Chairs under tables, mugs on coasters, towels hung across the rack to dry, keys in a bowl by the door. The chair was the first to move. In the morning, he found it closer to the window, about the width of his palm. He didn't remember moving it. A day later, the mug was in a different corner of the table, closer to the edge, even though he didn't like to take such risks. A week later, the magnet on the refrigerator hung lower, but the mark it left on the metal remained higher. He decided it was fatigue and distraction, but he drew a thin line with a pencil on the end of the table and placed the mug close to it. In the morning, the mug was a hair's breadth further away, and the line seemed to have faded. He thought that the wood might have warped from the humidity and redrew the line thicker. In the evening, he took a picture with a tripod, the corner of the table, the edge of the shelf, the outlet, and put his phone away. The line of observations formed itself. First, the chair. Second, the mug. Third, the shadow at the baseboard, which crept toward the middle of the room in the evening, even though the sun was setting on the opposite side. The fourth was the light switch in the hallway. My hand would find it, even if I wasn't looking. But now my finger would search a little to the right each time. The fifth was the shelf above the table. In the photo album of the housewarming, it was noticeably higher. He took out the old photos. In the photo with his mother holding a box of books, the shelf was at her shoulder level. Now the bottom edge of the shelf touched his ear. He took a tape measure, pressed it against the ceiling, measured to the shelf, and wrote it down. In the morning, he repeated the measurement. The difference was the thickness of a notebook cover. He told himself it was nonsense, but took the photo again anyway. To keep himself from going crazy, he decided to stretch a simple net. By evening, he drew a line with chalk along the baseboard, made 2 precise marks on the floor, and left a ruler there. At night, He turned on his old phone to record, placing it on the wardrobe so that it could see the entire room. In the morning, the video was empty, but on the first deep night, the door frame had moved slightly to the edge of the frame, as if the phone itself had jerked from the floor's breath. He checked the elevator schedule on the stand and noticed a note about a nightly restart on Thursdays. The shifts happened more often after these nights, but were not limited to them. In the receipts, he found a photo of the water meter, where part of the bathtub accidentally got into the frame. At that time, the door was half a hand's width closer to the kitchen doorway. Now it seemed further away. He ran his fingernail along the paint on the doorframe. The layer was fresh. He remembered that the previous owner had hung a new door before moving out, and took out the family toolbox he had inherited from his maternal grandfather. On the inside of the lid, a stamp from a small door workshop had been imprinted long ago. A pair of initials and the word workshop. The initials matched his grandmother's maiden name. He smiled. A hidden connection had been revealed in the details. A stranger's hand was almost like his own. At the time, it seemed like a beautiful coincidence. Later, it would become evidence. On the landing, his neighbor stopped him and said that at night, she heard the elevator make an extra jerk, and in the morning, the carpet near the cabin looked different. He noted furtively, the carpet by the elevator did indeed lie slightly differently in the morning, and by evening, it moved closer to the stairs. The building breathed with its hinges, and his apartment breathed with it. He called the janitor to ask about cleaning the floor, and the janitor, without ridiculing him, simply sat down at the threshold, tapped his finger on the doorframe, and said that the box was alive. He suggested bringing a long, self-tapping screw and plywood wedges to tighten the corner, and noted that the main thing was not to overdo it. It sounded like a cliché, but the janitor's gaze lingered on the dust-filled crack at the joint, and there was more professional insight in that attention than in any general recommendations. He did not yet know that this man would later make the door frame hold not emptiness, but the breath of the room. By evening, he received a letter from the provider's service. A polite employee wrote that he had read his question in the chat, advised him not to trust wide-angle photos, and gave him the idea of stretching a laser line across the ceiling and floor to assess the geometry. The employee added that he could send a set of wedges and a small tape measure. Soon the courier left a thin box on the doormat without a receipt. It was that very unexpected benefactor whose resource, access to tools and determination, could shift the conflict toward facts. He stretched the laser, marked the lines, and placed small crosses at the corners. At night, the top line remained straight, while the bottom line formed a slight arc near the wall with the bathtub. He went down to the basement to see the technician. The technician showed him an old plan of the ventilation ducts and a thin line between the kitchen and the bathroom, marked as a reserve, closed during major repairs. In the margins, written in pencil, was the name of the contractor, which matched the story told by his grandmother many years ago. The technician added that in their building, several apartments had been fitted with door frames by the same workshop. The papers folded into a simple handmade world where past decisions live out their fate together with the walls. He returned and made a decision that always exacerbates the threat. He left the camera in the closet overnight, pointing one lens at the hallway and the other at the kitchen, at the bathroom doorway, and opened the door just enough to fit his palm. He wanted to catch the moment when the hand searches for the switch in the wrong place. He wanted finally to see instability in numbers. He woke up to silence, but it was a different kind of silence. The air was thicker, like water before a storm. He stepped into the hallway, and this time found the switch without delay. He turned on the light in the bathroom and noticed that the mirror reflected the room behind him as slightly colder. In the reflection, the mug on the table was closer to the edge than in reality. The shelf was reflected lower. It was a small thing, but it pulled at an old thread of anxiety. He closed the door, waited, and opened it again. In the mirror, the room looked perfectly flat and empty, without him. He didn't rush to conclusions, turned off the cameras, and sat down at the table. A straight laser line remained on the tabletop under the lamp, and there was nothing mystical about this line, only straightness. He thought about the documents. He found the technical passport, which had a note at the bottom about the approval of the reinforcement of the bathroom doorway. The date coincided with the year when his grandmother moved in with his mother. He felt how the hidden connection between the surname on the lid of his grandfather's box, the contractor in the plan, and the line in the technical passport stuck to his current mistake like a label. The house did not whisper other people's secrets. It kept its own accounts. He went to the concierge and asked for the intercom recordings from the previous few nights. In the list, he found lines marked internal call at odd hours, without an apartment number. The concierge said that this happens when the block is breathing or someone is pressing from the inside. He brought the file on a flash drive and left without comment. There was also craftsmanship in his silence. When he returned, he ran his hand along the wall by the bathroom, as if stroking fur against the grain. Somewhere inside, there was a cold column of air. He remembered the laser and the plan, memorized the location. Then he removed the handle from the door, put on a temporary one so that his hand would not rely on habit, and marked notches with a knife along the edge of the box, thin ones at eye level, so that he could see the line even when his body was tired. In the evening, the janitor brought a long self-tapping screw and a couple of washers, as promised, and tightened it, barely touching it. The door stopped springing at the very last moment. He noted to himself, a small hand against status can solve problems in ways that reports cannot. At night, he checked the recordings again. In the video from the closet, the whole picture narrowed for a split second, as if the edges of the room were converging and then immediately moving away. In the kitchen recording, the bathroom doorway became narrower for a moment. Meanwhile, at that very moment, there was a blank line in the intercom log. He added 3 lines to his notebook and connected them with arrows. A narrow frame, an empty call, a cold pull. These arrows led to a simple conclusion. The apartment was not disappearing. It was used to working on someone else's channel, which had once been left in the wall. In the morning, he found a small box with no return address on the doormat. Inside were strips of wax-soaked fabric and a short note in uneven handwriting, with advice to stick them deep into the jamb so that moisture would not pull the wood. Without question, he did as this stranger, this almost invisible ally, suggested. The strips lay between the wood and the air like a sensible pause between inhaling and exhaling. In the evening, he opened the bathroom door again and saw in the mirror not an empty room, but his own, with a chair by the window, a mug on a mug, and a shelf in place. He didn't take the mirror's word for it, returned to the hall and pointed his finger at a rough spot on the tabletop varnish. He returned to the mirror. The rough spot was reflected. It was a clear test, without any miracles. For the first time in a long time, he left the cameras off for the night. He let the house live through the night without a viewer. In the morning, the shadow by the baseboard was where it should have been in the morning, and the chair was exactly under the table, just as he had left it. He noted that not everything is filled in instantly. Somewhere in the background, an understanding stirred. The house changes little by little every day, but it also changes depending on where you look. He made a plan for the next few days. Collect the papers, arrange for the engineer to come for an inspection together, ask the technician to print out another plan with marks on the channels, give the flat key to the concierge and thank the janitor, even if he waves it off. The final point was the hardest: to open the bathroom door at the most alarming moment and hold his gaze on the ordinary room. He knew that this attempt would exacerbate everything. He accepted this calmly. At noon, he was sitting at the table and suddenly noticed another detail in the housewarming photo. In the background, near the doorframe, there was a barely noticeable spot of peeling paint. Now that spot was gone. He ran his finger over it. The spot was smooth, like new putty. He wrote in the margins, "Someone has already walked this path before." This unthreatening but stubborn knowledge kept him on a simple pace. First actions, then conclusions. By evening, he again caught the elusive feeling that the entrance to the room had become a cardboard thickness higher. He did not try to measure it. He simply noted that the threshold had become a threshold. He told himself that he would check the bathroom again during the night and take the plan to the engineer in the morning. These simple steps provided a foundation. Someone else's hands with tools, paper with a stamp, his own discipline, and an apartment that finally had a chance to stop becoming foreign to him. He woke up before the alarm clock and realized from the silence that the elevator was stuck between floors, as it often was before maintenance. The air was thicker than it had been in the evening. He did a few routine things to test his memory. He placed his cup precisely on the saucer. He pushed the chair under the table as far as it would go. He placed his grandmother's book with the spine to the right as he liked to do when he was a child. He ran his hand along the edge of the bathtub and felt the smooth notch he had covered with wax the day before. Everything matched. That gave him confidence. He glanced at the sheet with the reserve plan between the kitchen and the bathroom and placed the engineer's report with thermal imaging photos next to it. The to-do list was simple. During the day, stop by the technician's office for a stamped copy. In the evening, check the bathroom without cameras. At night, don't touch anything. There was a notice in the mailbox about the upcoming inspection. The paper rustled dryly. It said that the commission would go through the apartments, paying attention to sanitary conditions and unauthorized work. He pulled himself together and did what he could. He removed the laser thread. He wiped the chalk off the floor. He hid the wedges in a box. He left the wax strips inside the jam. They were quiet and honest. They didn't cut into the wood. He attached a list to the refrigerator with a magnet. Meet the commission, show them the report, ask for an extension of the contract without causing a scene. The fear did not disappear, but it became like a working note. In the afternoon, he went to see the technician. The technician gave him a stamped copy of the plans and briefly remarked that the old pipes in their section sometimes behaved like living intestines. Sometimes they blew. Sometimes they quieted down. He thanked him and returned. At the entrance, the janitor was rolling a barrel of water. He said that the joint wasn't pulling now, but it was better not to touch it for a couple of days. It seemed to him that these words sounded like advice on breathing. Let the house and the person settle into the same rhythm. At home, he decided to live the day as usual, without measurements. He answered clients, closed requests, and called his mother. She asked if his ventilation duct was noisy and added that her door no longer caught after being sharpened. He said that his was fine too, and noticed that the usual dryness had disappeared from her voice. On the table lay a photograph of the housewarming. On the back, in small letters, was her note not to hang the shelf too low. The shelf now hung lower. He accepted this fact without anger, as if the house had delicately taken her wishes into account. When the sun went behind the house, the shadow at the baseboard became shorter than usual. He didn't grab the chalk. He just noticed. The threshold seemed to be a cardboard thickness higher. He didn't argue. In the evening, as he had promised himself, he opened the bathroom door without a camera and without preparation. The light in the hallway was soft. The mirror reflected the room evenly, but slightly colder. He looked for marks. The cup in the reflection stood on a mug, but seemed to be deeper in the wood. The chair was under the table, but half a finger closer to the center. The book lay with its spine not to the right, but upward, as if someone had picked it up and placed it differently. He did not see himself in the reflection, either in the doorway or in the glare. Everything was there, except him. The room was not empty. It was he who was empty. He didn't look away, and remembered where his line of sight had started. Chair, cup, shadow, light switch, shelf. He said all this to himself, like a to-do list, and took a step back. The cold from the tiles left his nose. He closed the door and sat down on a stool. He did nothing for a minute. The house breathed with pipes and cables. The elevator moved briefly and fell silent. He realized that the house wanted to reinforce one habit. If he peeked in on its absence, the house would give him absence. So he had to bring back presence with his hands. He took an empty frame from an old painting off the top shelf of the closet and hung it on the wall where the shelf used to be. Not as decoration, but as a plumb line at a distance. The frame did not touch the wall, and the shadow showed how the air flowed along the plane. The shadow was even. He placed a stool next to the bathroom door so that his hand would not reach for it out of habit. He put a pencil on the table and wrote one word on a piece of paper. Here. The piece of paper was already there, but he rewrote it so that his hand would remember the movement of writing. No mysticism, just motor skills. Late in the evening, the concierge knocked and said that tomorrow the intercom system would be shut down for an hour for maintenance. He smiled. The empty lines of internal call would disappear for at least one night. He nodded gratefully. It was the kind of system intervention that didn't explain anything, but made life easier. He didn't say out loud that it was luck. He just put the notice on the shelf and wrote the time at the bottom with his own hand so he wouldn't forget. At night, he woke up because he felt a slight draft in the hallway. The bathroom door was ajar, just a palm's width. Cold brick smelled through the crack. He stood and didn't move. He decided not to do anything at that moment, so as not to feed the emptiness. The silence settled and evened out. He returned to his room and lay down, without turning on the light. In the morning, he noticed a new detail. The magnet on the refrigerator had shifted the width of a fingernail, but the here note remained under it. This was important. The house could rearrange metal, but it did not rewrite its words. He smiled at this neat boundary. In the mailbox, he found the engineer's business card with a short note saying that he would be able to attend the inspection. It was confirmation. The outsider with resources had not abandoned him halfway. He put the card in a folder to show the commission if necessary. A neighbor by the elevator whispered that she had heard footsteps upstairs at night, as if someone was rearranging furniture. She shrugged and said that everything floats in houses like this. He said nothing, but wrote it down in his notebook. A coincidence with the timing of the intercom maintenance. These notes were not for mystical evidence, but for himself, to see the coincidences without embellishment. He made another decision that deliberately exacerbated the situation. He asked the janitor for a long belt and a small clamp for a couple of hours. He wanted to pull the jamb to the level of the upper edge when the door was open. The janitor brought them and said that it was better to hold it with time rather than iron. Leave it stretched until evening so that the wood would hear. He did so. The belt lay quietly. The clamp did not creak. In the evening, he removed it and felt with his palm how the box had stopped springing back. The threshold stopped playing like a string. On the table lay a new receipt from the apartment owner. It dryly warned that an inspection would take place in the coming days and asked that unnecessary items be removed from the wall. He turned the sheet over and saw on the back the small stamp of the department that had once approved the reinforcement of the bathroom. The surname matched the one on the old plan, where the contractor was listed in pencil. It was not a conspiracy, but a stitching together of several eras of one house. He accepted it as a rule of the game. Different people in the chain influence how his doors stand. Towards evening, he opened the bathroom again. This time he did it differently. First, he took a step inside, but did not look in the mirror. He touched the tile on the wall. He felt the seam. He took another half step, and only then looked up. The mirror reflected the room with him in it. In the reflection, his hand was resting on the doorframe. He felt the warmth of the wood on his finger and saw it in the reflection. The presence was stitched together. He didn't breathe a sigh of relief so as not to disturb the lag. He just caught his shoulders so he wouldn't fall over. He said to himself briefly, "That's how it should be." Then he conducted a mini investigation for the commission. He gathered copies of the documents, the stamped plan, the engineer's business card, and a brief diagram with the reserves marked into a single pile. He stuck a small sticky label on each piece of paper with an explanation: where it was taken, who signed it, how it proved the absence of unauthorized work. He put his observations in a separate file: a chair, a cup, a shadow, a switch, a shelf, a schedule for the shield, empty lines on the intercom. No guesses, just dates and short lines. These papers did not explain the strangeness, but they did explain his discipline. He knew that without the underappreciated hero, this whole stack would easily turn into paper noise. So he called the janitor and asked him to be home on the day of the inspection. The janitor agreed and added that he could show the commission his work on the doorframe if they asked. It was honest and important. A man who was not usually called in for such conversations was ready to stand by and say what he had done with his own hands. It changed the tone. At night, he didn't turn on the cameras again. The threshold remained even. By morning, the rug had moved to the baseboard to its usual width, but the shadow was where it should be in the morning. He found the switch on the first try. He opened the bathroom door and saw that the room in the mirror did not argue with him. He closed the door and realized that the main thing was that by the time the commission arrived, the house should look like a house, not an experiment. The day before the inspection, the elevator got stuck on the floor above. At the same time, he received a text message from the owner confirming the time of the visit. He made tea, placed the cup exactly on the saucer, as he had learned at the very beginning, and ran his hand over the chair that stood close to the table. A simple thing that doesn't run away turned out to be better than any mark. The day before, he went to the technician again to sign a copy of the plans. The technician said he would attach a printout of an old photo of the section with the previous doors. In the photo, the doorway did indeed look wider. This photo did not prove anything about the displacement, but it reminded the commission that the house had gone through different versions of itself. He thanked him and went home. In the evening, before going to bed, he checked the bathroom one last time. His hand reached for the switch. The light came on softly. The mirror reflected his room, with him and the word "here" under the magnet. He smiled without joy. That was enough to get through the night without peeking. He lay down and thought not about where the coroner would go tomorrow, but about how to talk to people. He would tell the commission that he had shown them the facts. He would tell the engineer that he appreciated his participation. He would tell the technician that the copies had helped. He would thank the janitor in front of everyone. And he would note to himself the main thing. None of these hands had performed miracles. They had all done their craft. And this craft, fused with the house, kept its presence better than light traps. He fell asleep to the steady noise of the house. The elevator coughed and fell silent. The shield clicked a minute earlier than usual and did not return. The bathroom door did not shake from the draft. The morning became his morning, and ahead of him was an inspection that would decide not the fate of the walls, but the placement of people in this story. He woke up and realized that he was ready to open the door himself. The inspection was scheduled for late morning, when the house breathed quietly and the elevator ran smoothly. He spent the hour before the visit training his memory. He placed the cup exactly on the saucer. He pushed the chair under the table as far as it would go. He placed his grandmother's book with the spine to the right. He ran his hand along the bathroom door frame and felt the same warm smoothness that had appeared after the gaskets were installed. He opened the bathroom door just wide enough to fit his hand and, without looking in the mirror, touched the seam on the tile. The threshold did not spring. He closed the door and left, trying not to check anything unnecessary. He put the folder on the table, a thermal imager, a stamped plan, a short explanatory note, the engineer's business card, a copy of the technical passport, which noted the old reinforcement of the doorway. On top was his observation notebook, a chair, a cup, a shadow, a switch, a shelf, a note about the shield on Thursdays, empty lines of the intercom. The commission arrived without fuss, politely, as if it were a weekday. The owner of the apartment kept a neutral face and said he was worried about the unapproved work. With him were an employee of the management company who was holding a notebook with pre-printed lines and a young maintenance specialist carrying a laser level. The engineer who had promised to come did indeed arrive, nodded in greeting, and said he would show his report if necessary. The janitor followed them upstairs and stood in the doorway, like a shadow from the doorframe, unobtrusive, but ready if called upon. They went into the kitchen, then into the living room. The laser grid was perfectly aligned. The specialist ran the beam across the ceiling, the floor, and the wall with the bathtub. At the seam, with the doorway, the upper thread barely trembled and immediately became even. He pointed to the device and said that it was within the margin of error, but it would not hurt to repeat the measurement in the evening. the owner asked him to pay attention to the marks on the jamb. The engineer looked up, noted the neat strips of wax, and said that these were soft gaskets that did not damage the wood, and that the self-tapping screw in one place kept the box from moving. He added that this was described in the report as a recommended measure for seasonal shrinkage. He was asked to show them the bathroom. He had prepared for this moment, but still felt the house closing in on him more than usual. He grabbed the handle and remembered his routine. Don't look in the mirror first. Fix yourself in place through touch. He ran his finger along the doorframe, replaced his anxiety with a gesture, and pushed the door just enough so that the seam did not pull. The light came on softly. He looked in the mirror last. It reflected his room along with him, with the word "here" under the magnet, and a cup on a mug. The specialist glanced at it, saw the usual tile, an even gap, and made a note on the sheet. The owner looked at the engineering report, frowned, and said that with such paperwork, he was not ready to talk about unauthorized work. The manager wrote down, "The skew is within normal limits. There is no mechanical damage. Observation and soft gaskets are recommended, and grooving is prohibited." The engineer put his report in a folder and said that the thermal imager could be repeated at the next inspection if the tenant was concerned. At the right moment, the janitor stepped closer and showed where exactly the box was jammed. He pressed his finger against it and said that it could not be pulled any further. Otherwise, the door would start to stick when turning. It sounded like a simple truth that you won't find in reports. The specialist nodded and asked to note in the protocol that the door frame adjustment work was performed as usual, without interfering with the load-bearing elements. The owner asked if this would affect the renewal of the contract. The manager replied that with this conclusion, the issues would be resolved, but on the condition that the tenant had enough gaskets and observations, without hacksaws and punches. He nodded. That would be enough. They glanced around the room, pausing at the shelf. The engineer noted that in the technical passport, the shelf was not an object, but a habit, and asked not to discuss habits. The owner smiled with the corner of his mouth, like a man who is more comfortable talking about nails than habits. The laser specialist asked to see the plan with the ventilation ducts. He spread the sheet on the table, pointed to a thin line marked "Reserve" and a cold strip on the thermal imager. The engineer said that these are the kinds of joints that like to play with air, and that this is exactly what is happening here. The manager wrote in the protocol, "Ventilation duct features, deviations within acceptable limits." While they were writing and sticking stickers on the sheets, there was a quiet creak in the hallway. The threshold made a slight sound that he already knew. The janitor nodded, as if he had bumped his forehead against the house and realized that it agreed. The specialist said that to be sure, he would check the intercom at night to close the issue of internal calls. The concierge promised to disconnect the power from the unit for a couple of hours, as he had already done. It was the very intervention with resources that, with a simple movement, closes an alarming line in the log. The engineer, leafing through the copies, suddenly paused at the technical passport and asked to turn over one document. On the back of the old agreement to reinforce the opening was the name of the workshop foreman. The engineer said he recognized the signature. His father had worked in the same workshop in his youth. They had the same forms and the same handwriting as the foreman who had signed it. He smiled without pride and added that these joints had been behaving the same way for decades. They breathed a little harder in early spring and after long shutdowns. The owner suddenly perked up and said that the chief maintenance engineer at their office had the same surname as the one on the form. The manager searched his phone for old correspondence and showed that the same surname did indeed appear in an archived letter about this section, only with different initials. An inconspicuous bundle of old hands, current positions, and his own joint formed a calm network. No mystery, just family and workshop ties that had gone into the woodwork. They signed the protocol, and the owner said he was ready to extend the contract if everything remained in order in the coming months. He replied that he planned to live quietly and placed his observation notebook on top without complaint as proof of his discipline. The engineer took it for a couple of minutes, leafed through it, and said that it was useful for him to look at such household journals. They show the rhythm of the home better than instruments. He asked permission to photograph a couple of pages without names. He nodded. This, too, was a small act of kindness. Knowledge goes further than one apartment. The commission left silently, like a tram picking up speed. The janitor lingered on the threshold and awkwardly adjusted the strap on the door frame, not touching it, but adjusting it with his gaze. He said that, just in case, he would leave a couple more gaskets in the utility room, in case they were needed. He thanked them in a way that everyone could hear. The manager noted that he would add the janitor to the protocol as an assistant, if he didn't mind. The janitor waved his hand, but a light flashed in his eyes, the kind that is usually denied to those who fix other people's problems. When the apartment was empty, the house did not deflate, did not drop its walls, did not click with something from inside. The room was quiet, not like after a thunderstorm, but like after cleaning. He ran his fingers over the places where he usually forgot how objects lived. The chair stood under the table. The cup was on the mug. The book was spined to the right. The sheet of paper here under the magnet had not slipped. He walked to the bathroom and, out of habit, froze in front of the door. He opened it to the width of his palm without looking in the mirror and touched the seam. Then he looked. He was in the reflection. No empty version. Shortly thereafter, an envelope was slipped under the door. Inside was an addendum to the contract, extending it for another term, provided that the rules were followed and there were no unauthorized works. At the bottom was the owner's signature and the manager's seal. There was also a sheet with recommendations for quiet measures, gaskets, humidity monitoring, no chiseling, and a re-inspection after the season. It looked like a dry piece of paper, but behind it were real people. An engineer with a form, a specialist with a laser, a technician with plans, a janitor with a belt. He felt the fear losing its grip, because now it was people, not cameras, who were in control of the story. In the evening, he went out onto the playground and met a neighbor. She said that the night was quiet, like in the good old days, and that the carpet by the elevators had not run away to the stairs. She noted that simple things often helped their section. A new lamp, a strong nail, a knot tied in time. He agreed and added that perhaps the most important thing is a hand that does not reach out to emptiness in time. At home, he ran through his old habit of checking things. He opened the bathroom door and didn't look inside right away. He touched the threshold and caught the smell of the tiles. Only then did he look in the mirror and see his usual reflection and the unperturbed room. In his notebook, he wrote briefly, paused before looking. Next to it, he added, "Gratitude to those who came and did not scare the house away." Below, even shorter, live. He didn't set up cameras for several days. The house continued to breathe in the same way. The switchboard clicked on Thursdays. The elevator stood between floors, before maintenance for a short breath. The rug sometimes moved toward the baseboard, and the shadow at the baseboard crept toward the middle in the evening. But all this became background again, not the plot. He put the small change back in its place. He stopped making marks, kept things tidy as before, and left 1 minute a day, empty so that the house and he could align without prompts. One evening, the engineer sent a thermal imaging photo for the archive and wrote that he would show it to his colleagues as a training example of silent shifts. He replied with a short thank you and closed the correspondence. There was bread on the windowsill, and its smell mixed with the smell of paint on the doorframe. So ordinary that it made him want to smile. He sat down, leaned his elbows on the windowsill, and felt that the spot under his elbow was as smooth as an old board in a familiar park. He approached the empty space where, many months ago, he had imagined danger. The wall was smooth, with a light, oval-shaped mark from the former shelf. He touched this pale line. It no longer seemed like the frame of another story, but was simply a mark that the house would have left anyway. He said to himself without pathos, "Enough." Then he heard the janitor closing the utility room, the concierge dropping a bunch of keys, the elevator whispering with its chain. It was a house that changed a little every day and gave him the right to change in response, but of his own free will. Before going to bed, he opened the bathroom door again. There was his reflection in his room. He turned off the light and left the door ajar, just wide enough for a palm, like leaving a breath for the night. The house did not take him anywhere. He chose to stay. And that, after all the minor investigations, turned out to be the best outcome. Not victory over strangeness, but the right not to turn it into destiny. He lived a few quiet days, and the house began to sound as it had before. A faint whistle in the ventilation around noon, a short thud of the elevator at the top landing closer to evening, a click of the switchboard on Thursdays. He stopped catching the rug's departure with every glance, and no longer listened to every sigh of the wall by the bathroom. Out of habit, he still left 1 minute a day empty. He sat on a stool in the hallway, looked at the warm door frame, and did nothing. At that moment, the house did not persuade or argue. A few days later, a notice appeared on the board at the entrance about nighttime maintenance of the ventilation ducts. The paper promised careful work and asked residents to remove light furniture from the walls. At the bottom, in blue pencil, there was a note from the technician that their section would be last, closer to midnight. He read it and felt an old tremor stir beneath his skin. The reserve channel would come alive again, and with it, its empty version. He didn't want to live under this whisper, but he couldn't dismiss it either. He wrote down a short note. Prepare the room, talk to people, live the night by the rules. During the day, he brought the technician a copy of their previous plan, where a thin line of reserve ran along the bathroom. The technician looked at it and said that the grate could be temporarily tied up with soft tape so that the flow would not jerk the wall. He gave him 2 strips of fabric soaked in the compound and explained how to attach them so that they could be easily removed later. In the utility room, the janitor picked up another strap and a clamp in case the box started to move. He took everything without fuss, put it all in one bag, and realized that now, instead of fears, he had tools and people. In the evening, the engineer called. He said he would be in the house that night because he was checking the neighboring riser and could take a look if it started to move. He thanked him, put away his phone, and for the first time ever, thought not about how to hold the wall with his gaze, but about how to prepare the house for proper work. Remove heavy objects from the corner, clear access, cover books from dust, place the cup evenly on the saucer, but not hold on to it like a talisman. It was almost midnight. He repeated his 3 points of support again. The chair under the table, the book with the spine to the right, the sheet of paper here under the magnet. In the bathroom, he secured a soft tape to the grate and left the door open just wide enough for a palm to fit through so that there would be no pressure difference. He inserted a light gasket into the jamb, as the janitor had advised. He did not turn on the laser thread. He agreed with himself that he would not turn the night into an experiment. The first sounds of work came from afar. A steady hum, short jolts, as if sand were pouring into the inner pockets of the house. The air in the hallway grew cooler. The frame of an old painting on the wall cast a clear shadow. You could see how the stream was flowing. The shadow did not tremble, only stretched slightly toward the corner. He looked at the crack in the bathroom door. The crack held. The light fabric on the grate barely moved. At one point, he felt the threshold under his fingers become a paper's thickness, higher. He didn't move. He sat down on a stool and endured the usual empty minute without getting up. The house breathed louder, but without a jolt. When the buzzing below grew louder, he got up, pressed his palms against the door frame, and listened to the wood. The wood was warm. He quietly and effortlessly tightened the strap, clamped the clamp, and stopped, so as not to overdo it. as the janitor had taught him. No further than necessary for breathing. The rumbling in the wall subsided. A soft thud came from the utility room. Someone was closing the lid of a bar. The elevator stopped one floor above, as if giving way to the air. He opened the bathroom door halfway, and as he had trained himself to do, first touched the tile seam, only then looking up. The mirror reflected his room along with him. No empty frames. His folder lay on the table under the lamp, and the white sheet with a single word, held in place by a magnet, was there too. He lingered on that word until his breathing matched the ambient noise. The work was finished closer to dawn. The fabric on the grate lay flat. The strap came off easily. A warm gasket remained in the jamb, and he decided not to remove it for at least a week, until the house forgot about the shock. The morning was surprisingly simple. The rug by the door looked where he had put it. The shadow by the baseboard was on the right side. The switch was found at the first touch. He poured tea, placed the cup exactly in the circle, as on the first day, and realized that this circle was not a ritual, but simply convenience. A day later, the management brought the night work report. At the bottom was a line. No disturbances detected in the resident's apartment. Observation recommended. Next to it was a note thanking the janitor for his help at the facility. He saw how the dry text reflected someone's invisible victory. The man who was usually called to clean up turned out to be the one who actually kept the house from falling into disarray. He took the paper out into the yard and showed it to the man who was fiddling with keys and a bucket in the basement. The latter waved it away as if it were unnecessary, but placed the sheet between the pages of his worn notebook, the same kind of notebook he had. In the afternoon, his mother called. She asked how the inspection had gone, how the night had been, and told him about her house. They had replaced the hinge, and the door had stopped complaining. He smiled, but didn't mention the walls again. They were now part of everyday life, not part of the story. He transferred the money he owed her and felt a strange lightness, as if a narrow belt had been removed from his chest rather than a debt. Almost immediately, another letter arrived from the archives. The engineer sent a copy of an old photograph of their section before the major renovation. In the photo, his doorway was wider, and the door opened in the other direction. On the back, the photographer had recorded the date and the name of the workshop master. The surname matched the one in the technical passport. Next to it was a note: model apartment for inspection. No secrets, just an explanation for the extra coldness in the mirror. Once upon a time, the door really did open differently, and the layout in the memory of the house sometimes woke up in its former position. He put the photo in his folder, like the last missing tile in a straight row. A week later, he noticed that his movement pattern had changed. He stopped checking the switch with his hand in the air and went straight to the spot. The shelf didn't seem too low. The chair rarely crept toward the window. The bookmark stopped moving from edge to edge. Sometimes he caught himself doing something new, touching the doorframe when he heard unfamiliar sounds. This touch became an anchor, simple and precise. One evening, the neighbors had a small move. Someone brought in a new washing machine. The elevator was choking, the landing was buzzing, and the staircase smelled of hot metal. He sat in his room, his palm on his knee, letting the house make as much noise as it wanted. In those moments, the mirror could have played another cruel joke, but he didn't go to check. He sat until everything calmed down. When he got up and opened the bathroom door, he saw only himself there. His presence withstood the noise of others. The maintenance department sent a dry note via messenger, saying that their case of silent displacements had been included in the manual for new specialists as an example of where it is not the perforator that decides, but the dimension. He did not respond with any emotion, just put a small check mark in his notebook. That check mark on his paper was worth more than any likes under someone else's story. After a while, the apartment owner announced that the contract had been extended for another term. In the appendix to the contract, there was a neat place for the janitor to sign as assisting with the adjustment. He did not expect such justice on paper, but it happened. The unsung hero, whose name is usually not written, was now in the document next to the seal. It looked honest and quiet. Quiet life continued. On Sunday, he called a craftsman to hang the shelf a little higher, as his mother had once requested. The craftsman came with his plumb line, asked no unnecessary questions, and hit the mark exactly. There were no old holes left on the wall. He decided not to return the traces to where they did not belong. The shelf fit perfectly. He placed his grandmother's book in the middle of it. Not magic, not a mark, but simply an object that had connected several hands over the years. Sometimes the house still showed its character. The rug habitually slipped toward the baseboard. The window handle found a different angle, and in the evening, the shadow crept into the middle. He stopped taking it personally. He took out the vacuum cleaner, straightened the rug with his foot, and adjusted the handle. The threshold ceased to be a thin line between with me and without me. The door became a door. One night, the draft from the stairwell was stronger than usual. Someone had not closed the door properly on the floors below. Invisible currents stretched across the reserve. He woke up, sat down on a stool, and endured his empty moment. His palm rested on the warm doorframe. Under his fingers was the calmness of wood. Then he got up, went to the kitchen, and poured himself some water. The bathroom mirror reflected the steady lamp and his shoulder. His cup stood on a saucer in the room, and under the magnet was the same sheet of paper. He didn't change a word. It held itself. That night he dreamed of another house, with windows facing old courtyards, with wider doors, with the foreman from the workshop who had once signed the paper. In this dream, no one disappeared. Everyone was doing their own thing. Someone was pulling air, someone was pulling a line, someone was pulling a belt. When he woke up, he caught himself falling asleep, without his usual habit of checking. And he realized that this was catharsis, which should not be viewed from the outside. He did not go anywhere through someone else's door. He stayed at home. One day, there was a small box on the rug by the door. Inside was an old flat key, the very one he had once picked up at his doorstep. Underneath it was a white piece of paper with a laconic note, found at the concierge's. He replayed the first few days in his mind. The camera flashing, the strange key, the doormat receding toward the baseboard. He closed the row. Now the key was back where it belonged, in the toolbox. He put it in the compartment next to the screwdriver and staples, not as a sign, but as a useful thing. Towards evening, the janitor came in, returned the extra gaskets, and asked with a nod if everything was holding up. He replied with the same brief gesture. Their eyes shared a common understanding. The house was not a mystery or an enemy, but the long work of many hands. He closed the door behind him and heard the cart with garbage bags turning around downstairs, the lock on the utility room clicking again, the elevator pulling on the cable. These sounds, once frightening, were now part of his here. He sat down on the stool again, waited a minute, opened the bathroom door, and looked in the mirror. There he was. His table, his chair, his shelf, his sheet of paper. The room reflected not a foreign layout, but a simple fact. He had chosen to stay and had done everything humanly possible to make it happen. None of the plot twists came from outside, like a miracle. Everything happened because of people's decisions. The manager who sent the wedges, the engineer with the report, the technician with the stamp, the janitor with the belt, the owner who withdrew the complaint, and he himself, who left a minute empty and held his gaze on the ordinary room. He closed the door and turned off the light. A notebook lay quietly on the table. On the first page were the words that had started his home: chair, cup, shadow, switch, shelf. On the last page was one word, and that was enough.